Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to a very special edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. And today I am going to be taking a look at the massive and amazing catalogue from one of the greatest, most iconic, celebrated, decorated and respected musicians in history, and is one of the most important voices for the guitar, and has been a major force on the music scene for well over 50 plus years, and is still going very strong to this day as we speak, and continues to put out top-notch quality music. He is always reinventing himself, constantly raising the bar, and he is incredibly fearless and is not afraid of trying out new and different things, and is always striving to do better and continues to take his instruments to new heights that has never been seen before. And when you hear him play, you know straight away who it is, as he has such a distinct and recognizable sound that everyone says, I know who that is. And he is, in my opinion, the Mozart of music. And this is someone who, quite frankly, needs no introduction whatsoever. I am talking about, of course, the one and only legendary guitarist, composer, and bandleader, Pat Metheny. So, ever since bursting onto the scene in the 70s, Pat Metheny has seen it all, done it all, and played and collaborated with just about everyone, from Gary Burton to Milton Nasicmento to Joni Mitchell to David Bowie to Abbey Lincoln to Michael Brecker to Ornette Coleman to Kenny Garrett to David Liebman to Logan Richardson to Joshua Redman to Tony Williams to Jack DeJohnette to Herbie Hancock to Chick Corea. You name it, Pat Metheny has played with them all. He has also played in duo with John Scofield, Brad Mehldau, Maria Jopek, Jim Hall, and Charlie Haden, and of course Lyle Mays, who was his main collaborator and partner for many years in PMG, and together they wrote some of the greatest music ever. Pat Metheny has also led his own bands, the Pat Metheny Group, the Pat Metheny Unity Band / Unity Group, Side-Eye, various trios, quartets, quintets, duos, large ensembles, you name it, Pat Metheny has done it all. And for today's special edition, I'm going to be taking a look at Pat Metheny's solo catalogue of albums, which is a total of 24 albums. So we won't be talking about any PMG or Unity albums. You can check them out as separate editions from this series. We are just going to be mainly concentrating on Pat Metheny's solo catalogue of albums. I can honestly tell you now, there is no bad album in this catalogue. They're all fantastic. Some of them are true classics, some of them are iconic, a few of them are absolutely legendary. And as always, I'm going to be talking about each album individually, and I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. Not an easy challenge, so much excellent music. They're all different, they all have their own unique and distinct personality, and they all have a bit of everything. There's all a different kind of flavour here. We've got solo guitar, duo, trio, quartets, film scores. It's all here. And as I said, they're all different, but they all still sound like Pat Metheny. And one thing you'll notice when we go through Pat Metheny's solo catalogue is how much Pat Metheny has evolved as a guitar player. For example, if I was to take a Pat Metheny album from 1977 and put it up against a Pat Metheny album from 2024, they don't sound the same. You can still hear it's him, but they're so different and so worlds apart from each other. And that's a true testament to Pat Metheny as a musician. As I said at the beginning, he's always trying out new and different things, and that to me sets him apart from all of the other guitar players. Pat Metheny has his own sound, his own style. No one can copy this guy. Sure, there are guys who sound similar to him, but when you hear the man himself, you know straight away, yeah, I know who that is. That's the guy I know. That's Pat Metheny. So we are going to start with the first album, which came out in 1976, and it's a trio album, and this is the one that started it all, Bright Size Life. So this is the one that kicked off one of the most iconic careers of all time, and this features two legends in their own rights, Jaco Pastorius on bass and Bob Moses on drums. And of course, we've got Pat Metheny on 6-string and 12-string guitars. Does not get any better than this. Pat Metheny and Jaco Pastorius together, whew, absolutely red hot. And this was just before Jaco Pastorius joined Weather Report and became the iconic legend of bass playing. Jaco Pastorius sounds absolutely incredible on this album, as does Bob Moses. And Pat Metheny, you can hear it's him. He's not quite there yet, but it's there for you to hear. You know straight away, yep, I know who that is. And the playing on here, red hot. This is a cooking album, to say the very least. And this album, Right Size Life, would go on to become a true classic later on. And as I said, this is the one that started it all. And to me, it's absolutely legendary. So all of the compositions are written and composed by Pat Metheny, with the exception of one track, which is an Ornette Coleman composition. So a little bit of foreshadowing for what Pat Metheny would go on to do many years later with Ornette Coleman. But this is a tremendous trio album. And this was an environment that Pat Metheny would continue to play in for many years in his career. And this is some red hot playing from Pat Metheny and Jaco Pastorius and Bob Moses. Three guys at the top of their musical game, and they would all go on to do great things in their careers. Bob Moses, of course, was the veteran on this album. And when you hear Pat Metheny and Jaco Pastorius, these two guys were in their early 20s, and they sounded like they were playing for like 10 years. It's just insane. So we've got the title track, Bright Size Life, Cirebon, Unity Village, Missouri Uncompromised, Midwestern Night's Dream, Unquity Road, Omaha Celebration, Round Trip / Broadway Blues. An excellent collection of songs from start to finish. No bad track here. And the best thing about it, Pat Metheny was just warming up. The best was yet to come from this young guitarist. So the standout tracks for me are Bright Size Life, Cirebon, Missouri Uncompromised, Midwestern Night's Dream, Unquity Road, and Omaha Celebration. But all of these songs are excellent. No bad song at all. And for me, it's a true classic. Absolutely love this album. So there you have it. Bright Size Life, a fine debut, and the one that started it all. Love it. A true guitar classic, in my opinion. Great stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1977. And for me, I consider this one to be very important for historic reasons, mainly because of the musicians that are featured on this album. And for me, this would help set the stage for Pat Metheny forming his main band, which we would come to know as the Pat Metheny Group. And this one is called Watercolors. So, Watercolors is a quartet album, and this features the first appearance of Lyle Mays on piano and Danny Gottlieb on drums, as these three guys would go on to form the Pat Metheny Group with bassist Mark Egan. And we also have Eberhard Weber on bass. Now, Eberhard Weber only appeared on one Pat Metheny album, but he played an important role in Pat Metheny's music, as his bass playing would help to shape the sound for what we would come to know later on as the PMG sound. And he has a very large presence on this album. Imagine Jaco Pastorius playing fretless bass but as an upright instrument. That's kind of what Eberhard Weber sounds like. He gets these very low notes but on a more higher register, and at times it does sound like an acoustic bass but more on the fretless amplified side of things. And to me, he's all over this album. He's got a very large presence, as does Lyle Mays, whose piano playing would go on to play a very important role in Pat Metheny's music. And Danny Gottlieb's drumming is just all over this album. He's got a very big presence. Pat Metheny and Danny Gottlieb, of course, were part of Gary Burton's band. Eberhard Weber, of course, was a special guest on Gary Burton's music, and at the time, Eberhard Weber was a very big name, highly respected. Anytime you had him on your album, it was always a big deal, and having him here with Pat Metheny was also not only a big deal, but an important one as well, as he would pretty much help Pat Metheny go to the next level. And for me, Watercolors is a magnificent album and has got some of his most memorable tracks on this one. So all of the compositions are written and composed by Pat Metheny. We've got the title track, Watercolors, which is pretty much like a PMG track, just not by name, but you can definitely hear PMG in the music, and a lot of that is due to the deep rapport that Pat Metheny and Lyle Mays would develop together, which would go on to become legendary. We've got a solo guitar piece, Icefire, with Pat Metheny on electric guitar, absolutely haunting. Then we got the menacing and atmospheric Oasis, which has got Pat Metheny on acoustic guitar, and we got Eberhard Weber on bass playing it as a bowed melody, and he develops this very almost like screaming operatic sound on the bass. That sound, it's really, really enchanting, and it's an absolute gorgeous track. And then we got Lakes, which sounds like another PMG track, absolutely beautiful. River Key, which sounds like PMG, which kind of sounds similar to what would become like American Garage. Really good. And then we got two-part suite. We got part one, Florida Greeting Song, which is a short solo acoustic guitar track. And then we got Legend of the Fountain, which is like a guitar drum jam with Metheny and Gottlieb. Absolutely amazing. And then we got the 10-minute epic called Sea Song, which is very slow, very haunting, very atmospheric, and it just builds and builds and builds. It's mostly Pat Metheny and Lyle Mays, with Weber and Gottlieb providing, the sounds in the background as a rhythm section, but it's mostly all Pat Metheny and Lyle Mays. It's just absolutely gorgeous. Love it. So the standout tracks for me are Watercolors, Oasis, Lakes, Florida Greeting Song, and Sea Song. But every song from top to bottom is just excellent. And for me, this is the one that pretty much would set the table for what would become to know as PMG. So there you have it. Watercolors, another excellent album and a great follow-up to Bright Side's Life. And this would mark the beginning of Pat Metheny leading his own band. Love it. Another great album, and one that I listen to quite often. Excellent stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in '79, and this is a solo guitar album, the first of many to come from Pat Metheny, and this one is called New Chaca. So after two previous albums, a trio album and a quartet album, Pat Metheny returns, this time with a solo guitar album. And for me, I have always said this from the beginning, and I still stand by this. As much as I love all of the group stuff, all of the trio stuff, quartets, you name it. There is no better listening experience than Pat Metheny solo guitar. To me, it's an environment he thrives in, and he just sounds absolutely amazing. So this is all Pat, no other instruments, just Pat Metheny on solo guitar, featured on electric 6 and 12 string guitars, acoustic guitar, 15-string harp guitar, and electric bass as well. Pat Metheny's not a bad bass player either. So excellent album, and this is a very lovely album, very haunting, very atmospheric, and very typical style of sound that the ECM label were known for and still are known for to this day. And it's a great album. And if you like solo guitar, or if you'd like to hear Pat Metheny playing solo guitar on his own, you can't go wrong with this one. This is a great one to start with. And as I said, this is the first solo guitar that Pat Metheny would put out and the first of many to come. So we've got Nucha Chakra, great opener with lots of guitar strumming and overdubbed with the electric guitar. We've got Country Poem, absolutely gorgeous. Long Ago Child / Fallen Star, another excellent song. Heritage is another great song. And the iconic Suno Con Mexico. Love this song, one of my favorites from this album. And Daybreak. So all of the compositions, of course, are written and composed by Pat Metheny, and it's just an excellent album from start to finish. Doesn't get any better than this. Pat Metheny playing in solo guitar, doing what he does best, and that's putting out excellent music. Standout tracks for me are New Chachapua, Country Poem, Suno Con Mexico, and Daybreak. But great album. And again, as I said, all of these albums are all different. They all showcase different sides to Pat Metheny's personality, and it's a lovely album and one that I would highly recommend to anybody who is into solo guitar. So there you have it, Pat Metheny, New Chachaqua, great solo guitar album, and as I said, the first of many to come. Beautiful album, love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1980, and it's a double album, and it's one of my all-time favorites Pat Metheny albums. And this one is a very special album, mainly because of the guys who are featured on this album. And for me, it's just one of his best albums ever, and it's got some of my favorite musicians on this one. This one is 8081. So this is the first album that Pat Metheny would feature saxophone, and for me, this is one of Pat Metheny's greatest albums ever made. It's a true supergroup, and it features some of the biggest names in jazz. So we've got Pat Metheny on guitars, Charlie Haden on bass, Jack DeJohnette on drums, and Dewey Redman and Michael Brecker on saxophones. Doesn't get any better than this, and this really showed that Pat Metheny is more than capable of leading some of the best musicians in the world and writes some of the best music for the guys he's got. And for me, this was a classic. Every song on this album is just incredible. The playing and the way Pat Metheny is able to showcase each of these guys is just absolutely incredible. And a few of these guys would go on to become Pat Metheny's main collaborators in his career. And these guys would play together quite a lot throughout the 80s all the way up to the 2000s. Michael Brecker, of course, he would come out of this with his own solo career 7 years later, and Pat Metheny would go on to play a big part in Michael Brecker's career. Pat Metheny and Charlie Haden would go on to make history and collaborate and record their classic duo album, Beyond the Missouri Sky. And Pat Metheny would go on to play with Jack DeJohnette in a number of different settings on Jack DeJohnette's classic Parallel Realities album. And Jack DeJohnette, of course, was a part of Song X with Ornette Coleman. And of course, Pat Metheny and Dewey Redman, they would continue to play with each other on and off live. But a lot of history between these five guys. And as I said, they would all continue to play with each other throughout the 80s all the way up to the early 2000s. And what makes this album even more special is three of the five musicians on this album are sadly no longer with us. That's Charlie Haden, who passed away in 2014. Dewey Redman passed away in 2011, and Michael Brecker, who left us far too soon in 2007. But what an album this is, and this features some of the best playing from everyone. And all of the compositions are written and composed by Pat Metheny, with the exception of one track, which is an Ornette Coleman composition, and one track which is co-composed by all five musicians. I absolutely adore this album. I listen to this one all the time, and it's a classic. It's just an absolute masterpiece. So we got on disc one the epic 20-minute plus two folk songs, which is just a great way to kick off the album with beautiful acoustic strumming from Pat Metheny. Michael Brecker, he's just on fire. He just comes in and just plays this unbelievable, relentless sax solo, which at times sounds like a machine gun. He's just on top form. And then on part two, it breaks down into a trio with very haunting bass work from Charlie Haden, and there's a great drum solo from Jack DeJohnette as well. But what a way to kick off this album. It's just absolutely amazing. Then we got 8081, the title track, which features Dewey Redman. Hard hitting, fast paced, very enjoyable, very colourful as well. A little bit on the avant garde side of things, but very enjoyable. And Dewey Redman, one of the all time great sax players, and very different kind of sax player to Michael Brecker. Michael Brecker is more rooted in jazz fusion and jazz, and Dewey Redman, he's more rooted in avant garde. But wow, absolutely beautiful track. And then we got the Bats, another great track, and it would get reworked as the Bats Part 2 with PMG for Off Ramp. Completely different, of course, but great playing from Charlie Haden, great playing from Michael Brecker and Dewey Redman. Lovely track. I love both versions of the Bats, Part 1 and 2. They're both different, but I love them both just as much. And then we got a trio track, Turnaround, which is just absolutely gorgeous, and that would pretty much remain in Pat Metheny's set list whenever he played in trio. Really, really good, and hard to believe that this is the only recorded track that features Haden and DeJohnette. Quite amazing, that is. And then we move on to the second disc. We got the Wild Open, which has just got everybody going nuts and really channeling in the spirits of Ornette Coleman. And then we got the hard hitting Pretty Scattered, another great track as well. Every Day I Thank You is one of my all-time favourite songs, and it's just Michael Brecker's finest hour with, for me, the greatest Michael Brecker sax solo you will ever hear. He's just absolutely on top musical form. Love it. And then we got the short but very sweet Going Ahead, which features Pat Metheny on solo acoustic. And wow, what a way to close out the album. Just Pat Metheny playing solo guitar. It's just absolutely beautiful. So the standout tracks for me are two folk songs, 8081, The Bat, Every Day I Thank You, and Going Ahead. But this whole album, from start to finish, is just a masterpiece. Absolutely adore this album. For me, all due respect to Pat Metheny, he sounds great, but the standout guy of the five is Michael Brecker. He just owns this album. And this pretty much would set the tone for what Michael Brecker would do with his own solo albums not too long after this. Absolutely amazing. There you have it. 8081, one of my all-time favourite Pat Metheny albums. A true classic. Absolutely love this one so much. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1984. And for me, this could very well be the greatest Pat Metheny trio album ever. And this one holds a very special place in my heart, and mainly because of the two musicians that are featured on this album. And for me, as great as all of the other trio albums that Pat Metheny has put out in his career, this one really stands head and shoulders above all of them, and to me is just a trio masterpiece. And this one is Rejoicing. So this sees Pat Metheny return to the trio environment once again, and this time features Charlie Haden on bass and Billy Higgins on drums. To me, this is kind of like a continuation of 8081, but this time in a trio format. And for me, this is a classic. As I said, for me, probably the greatest Pat Metheny trio album ever. And the rapport, the musicianship, and the chemistry and synergy between these three musicians is just absolutely astounding. And it's quite a laid back album, but there's also some wild moments on this one as well. But I just absolutely adore this album. And wow, Pat Metheny has never sounded better than he does here with these two greats who are both long-time collaborators of Ornette Coleman, whose presence is felt quite a lot on this music, even though he's not actually featured on Rejoicing, but you can hear his influence throughout the music. Now, we've got two Pat Metheny compositions and one co-composition by Pat Metheny and Charlie Haden. And we've also got three Ornette Coleman compositions, one Charlie Haden composition, and a standard by Horace Silver. So it's a little bit of a different album. So they're not all Pat Metheny originals. So it's kind of like a mixture of everything. But wow, Rejoicing is one of my all-time favorite Pat Metheny albums and my favorite trio album from Pat Metheny. Absolutely love this one so much. So we start off with Lonely Woman, which features Pat Metheny on acoustic guitar. What a way to start this album off with gorgeous, lush acoustic playing from Metheny. We've got Haden grooving along with very soulful and slow bass playing, and we've got Higgins just strumming away with the brushes on the drums. It's just absolutely gorgeous. Love it. And then we got the very fast-paced Tears Inside, which is an Ornette Coleman composition. Absolutely amazing showcase by all three musicians. We got Humpty Dumpty, which is another excellent track. And we've got the very bluesy Blues for Pats. Very bluesy indeed. Very enjoyable. And then we got the title track, Rejoicing, which is another great track. And then the last three tracks for me is some of the best music and playing from this Pat Metheny trio. We got Story from a Stranger, which for the first half starts off with very soulful acoustic playing, and then Pat Metheny just burns it up on the guitar synth synclavier with the acoustic guitar overdubbed and strumming away. It's just absolutely menacing. And speaking of menacing, what about The Calling? This is pretty much off ramp, stripped down as a trio. It's just mad, it's crazy, it's wild, it's loud, and it pretty much is setting the stage for what Pat Metheny would go on to do in Song X with Ornette Coleman. It's just absolutely mad. It's almost like a metal track, you know. It's just absolutely crazy. And then we close out with a nice menacing and atmospheric track, Waiting for an Answer, which has got Pat Metheny on guitar and Charlie Haden on bowed bass. And wow, it's just absolutely very lush and a very nice, peaceful way to close out Rejoicing. Great, great album. Standout tracks for me, Lonely Woman, Story from a Stranger, The Calling, and waiting for an answer. But like I said, for me, the greatest Pat Metheny trio album ever made. Doesn't get any better than this. And what makes this album even more special is, as I said, Charlie Haden and Billy Higgins are sadly both no longer with us. But what an impression they leave. And I would love to have seen another album from these three, but the fact that we just got this one, I'm happy with that. And boy, what an album we've got. Absolutely beautiful. For me, the greatest Pat Metheny trio album ever made. Excellent stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1990. And this sees Pat Metheny return with a rhythm section that's equally as legendary as the one comprised of Charlie Haden and Billy Higgins. And for me, this is another favourite trio album of mine, and I will definitely put this one up there with Rejoicing. And this one is Question and Answer. So, Question and Answer, as I mentioned, sees Pat Metheny back in the trio environment once again, this time with bassist Dave Holland and drummer Roy Haynes. Dave Holland and Roy Haynes, two of the biggest names in the history of jazz music. They have played with just about everyone. Roy Haynes, of course, was a huge part of the legendary Chick Corea trio with Miroslav Vitchus. Now He Sings, Now He Sobs. And of course, Dave Holland was a huge part of the legendary Miles Davis's bands. So these guys have a very long history collectively and individually. And Question and Answer, an amazing trio album, and this would feature some compositions that would go on to become some of Pat Metheny's classics that would remain in his set list to this day. And it's a bit of a mixture here. So we've got some Pat Metheny originals, a couple of Ornette Coleman originals, we've got Miles Davis original as well, and some standards as well. This is an amazing trio album, and the production is excellent, and these three just sound absolutely incredible. So we got Solar, great opener, and some great Roy Haynes drumming. We've got the title track, Question and Answer, which would go on to become one of Pat Metheny's most legendary songs. H and H, another great Pat Metheny song. Never Too Far Away, which is more of a ballad, absolutely beautiful. We've got an Ornette Coleman composition, Law Years, great song as well. Change of Heart is just absolutely beautiful. And we got All the Things You Are, another great song. And then we got Old Folks, which is a beautiful standard. And then we got the closer, Three Flights Up, which sounds like PMG. We've got a bit of synclavier orchestration going on in the background. We've got the cymbal work, everything going on there. It just sounds like PMG. It's just absolutely beautiful. Excellent bass playing from Dave Holland. Great drumming from Roy Haynes, who really stands out on this album. And he's just all over the music with lots of tasty drumming, very hard hitting, very laid back in some spots, but he really has a commanding presence on this album. And Pat Metheny, he sounds amazing as always, and a very unplugged Pat Metheny. So no guitar synth or synclavier, just Pat Metheny playing straight jazz guitar with a rhythm section, and I love it. It's just absolutely amazing to hear Pat Metheny in an almost unplugged setting. So it's very enjoyable, and this is one that I listen to quite a lot. So the standout tracks for me are Solar, Question and Answer, H and H, Never Too Far Away, Change of Heart, and Free Flight Up. Absolute amazing album, one of my favourite Pat Metheny trio albums, and one I would put up there with Rejoicing. Absolutely amazing. Love this album so much. And Pat Metheny, Dave Holland, and Roy Haynes would reunite many years later as they would go on to play with Gary Burton on his Like Minds album, which also featured Chick Corea. And the rapport, the musicianship, and the chemistry between these three musicians is just second to none. So there you have it. Pat Metheny, question and answer. Absolutely love this one. Classic. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1992, and this one could very well be the greatest Pat Metheny album of all time. Pat Metheny says it's his greatest album ever. I'm sure many people are not going to disagree with that one, but in terms of his execution, composition, direction, everything about it, this one could very well be the greatest of all of the Pat Metheny albums. And this one is called Secret Story. So this is a reissue as a double album, which came out in 2007. And it's got a bonus disc which features 5 bonus tracks. And for me, this is a true Pat Metheny classic. It's got so many memorable tracks. The bonus tracks are really good as well. Look at this as like Pat Metheny goes to the movies. It's got a very cinematic feel, very heavily orchestrated. It's massive, it's epic, it's powerful, and it's got some of Pat Metheny's best writing and playing. You name it, it's all on here, and it's as close to a PMG album you will ever hear. Think of Pat Metheny Group on steroids, or like an expanded version of PMG, and it's just an amazing album. It really, really is. So let's have a look and see who's actually on this album. As I know, there's quite a lot of musicians who are featured on this album. A nice, cute little doggy there. So we've got Charlie Haden, Nana Vasconcelos, Armando Marcel, Lyle Mays. We've got Mark Ledford, Will Lee, Steve Ferroni, Steve Rodby, Paul Wertico, Gil Goldstein. We got the London Orchestra, who was conducted by Jeremy Lubbock. We got Danny Gottlieb, the original PMG drummer. And we've also got Toots Tilminson, unbelievable harmonica player. He really is. He was such a good player. We've got Pat Metheny's brother, Mike Metheny. We got a horn section featuring John Clark, Dave Barragon, Dave Taylor, Tom Malone, Ryan Kissel, Michael Mosman, Anthony Jackson as well. And we got Andy Findon. It's just a massive collection of musicians on here. Akiko Yano is on this album. Sakila Kanga on harp. And we've also got the Pat Metheny Group, who are featured on this album as well. Paulo Braga, there's so many musicians on here. Look at that. That's all the guys who are featured on this album. And for me, this is, as I said, Pat Metheny's greatest album ever. I can't think of any album that comes close to this. It's just such an epic masterpiece. So we got the first track on disc 1, Above the Treetops, which is just absolutely hauntingly beautiful and very tribal and warrior-like, especially at the beginning. It's just absolutely incredible. Sounds like the beginning of a movie. It's just really, really lovely, with great acoustic playing from Pat Metheny. Then we got the fast-paced Facing West, which sounds like a PMG track. Absolutely beautiful, with great strumming guitar playing. Then we got Cathedral in a Suitcase, which is just massive on an orchestral level. Finding and Believing, which starts off as kind of like a funky number with some funky bass playing, and then it goes into this very fast-paced, almost like African-like tribe mood. And then we've got The Longest Summer, which has got one of the most gorgeous guitar synth solos you will ever hear. Sunlight is absolutely beautiful. Rain River has just got Pat Metheny playing sitar. absolutely lovely. Always and Forever, one of Pat Metheny's most beautiful songs ever, with a great harmonica solo from the legendary Toots Tilminson. See the World, which is like a PMG number, absolutely lovely. As a Flower Blossoms, I Am Running to You, short and sweet. We've got Antonia, which has got a lovely accordion playing from Gil Goldstein. Then we got the epic The Truth Will Always Be, which has got one of the most hard hitting, blazing guitar synth solos from Pat Metheny. Tell Her You Saw Me, slow, lovely, and very haunting. And Not to Be Forgotten, our final hour, which is kind of like the end of a film, like a very somber, very sad ending to like a film. Maybe like someone's left or someone's passed away. It's just absolutely very emotional piece. And then we got on disc 2, Back in Time, which has got great harmonica playing from Toots Tilminson and great acoustic playing from Pat Metheny. Then we got Understanding, which sounds like a Pat Metheny group track. A Change in Circumstances, another great track, very orchestral. We've got Look Ahead, lovely. And then we got Et si c'était la fin, which means as if it were the end, which is just very good. But this whole album, from top to bottom, is just epic. It's just such a massive album. As I said, it just feels like a cinematic movie. If you listen to it all the way through, it's like you're watching a movie. And this could have easily been a film score. And I know Pat Metheny's done film scores before, but this really does feel like a massive, epic movie. So the standout tracks for me on disc 1 are Above the Treetops, Facing West, The Longest Summer, Sunlight, Rain River, Always and Forever, See the World, The Truth Will Always Be, and Tell Her You Saw Me. And on disc 2, Back in Time and Understanding and A Change in Circumstance. Beautiful album. For me, probably Pat Metheny's greatest album ever. And so many memorable songs. A lot of them would remain in the set list to this day. He still plays a lot of this material. Wow, it's just absolutely beautiful. Love this Secret Story. So there you have it. It's Pat Metheny, Secret Story. For my money, could very well be the greatest Pat Metheny album ever made. Tremendous stuff and a true Pat Metheny masterpiece. Love this one. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1994. And this one, for me, I wouldn't really say it's a clunker. It's not terrible, but it's not really one I ever reach for. Now, I did say before that I avoided Song X like the plague for many years, but I eventually did listen to all of it, and I came out of it with a newfound respect, and I actually do enjoy it now. This album, I can't get along with at all. It's not bad. I suppose you've got to be a certain kind of person to like it. But I wouldn't say I dislike it, but I don't hate it either. It's just nothing. And I love Pat Metheny, but this is one that I don't really listen to because it's just a bit too out there for me. Nothing against it. I appreciate what he was trying to do. He wanted to do something a little bit different. Maybe I might bite the bullet one day and listen to the whole thing one day when I do get round to it or when I decide to do it. But for now, I probably won't do that. But I have listened to this a couple of times, but I just don't click with it. And I don't know what it is. Is it an avant-garde album? Is it a Shredfest album? Is it someone's idea of a joke? I don't know, but it's not really one I reach for. I think you guys know the one I'm talking about. This one is Zero Tolerance for Silence. It's got 5 tracks. It's just nuts. It's wild. It's out there. It packs a punch or scratches your eye out, depending on what you think. Yeah, it's not really one I click with that much. I don't hate it. It's just not one that I go to much. As I said, I may bite the bullet one day if I'm drunk. But I just don't really see what this was supposed to be. It just seems a bit of an odd fit compared to all the previous albums that I've just talked about. I wouldn't say it's enjoyable. I wouldn't say it's, oh my god, this is bad. I don't know what it is. It's just weird. It's just a weird album. There's some great playing. It's a couple of decent tracks, but it's just not one I go for that much. And there's no titles here. I think what it is, it's just zero tolerance for silence, and it's broken up into like 5 parts. I think that's the best way I can describe it. But yeah, I don't reach for this one at all. Part one is like 18 minutes. It's just a noise fest. Part two is like 5 minutes. Bit mellow, but just sounds more like he's tuning up the guitar. Part three is like 4 minutes. It's just like rock music or just like a jam, depending on what you look at it. And then part four is like 5 minutes. It's not too bad. And then we got part five. It's just, oh boy. Oh my god. But yeah, I don't reach for this one at all. Don't hate it, but I don't like it either. Just nothing really. And I love Pat Metheny, but this one, yeah, it has no place in the catalogue, but I appreciate what he was trying to do. He wanted to do something a little bit different. But yeah, this is not for me. But as I said, I may listen to the whole thing one day. Who knows? I might bite the bullet, and who knows? Maybe I might like it. But for now, no thank you. If I had to choose a standout track, it would probably be part two and four. But the rest of it, yeah, I'm just not brave enough to listen to it. Sorry, Pat. Love you, but yeah, not for me, I'm afraid. I do like avant garde to a point if I've got a certain ear for it. Yeah, but this one for me is not really one I go to. Kind of reminds me what Terj Ripdale did many years ago. But yeah, this is not one I go to for that much. But it is what it is. Don't hate it. I respect that it's there, but it's not one I reach for. So there you have it. It's Pat Metheny, Zero Tolerance for Silence. Not one you would recommend your mum to listen to, or your grandparents for that matter. Yeah, that's all I've got to say about it. So there you have it. Pat Metheny, Zero Tolerance for Silence. Yeah, moving on. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1996, and it's a film score for an Italian movie. And as I said, Pat Metheny's done, film scores in the past, but this one is very enjoyable, and this one is called Passaggio per Paradiso. So this is a soundtrack of the movie of the same name. It's very much a solo effort. It's all Pat. He plays everything: keyboards, bass, drums, piano, electric and acoustic guitars. Plays everything. And the way he makes the keyboards and the synclavier orchestration just makes it sound like one big gigantic orchestra. And it's a great soundtrack. It's very haunting, very atmospheric. Some parts is very dark and menacing. Some parts are really gigantic and epic. It's a really good soundtrack. It's not really well known outside of Italy, but it's a great soundtrack, and I love this one a lot. It's a really good score from start to finish, and it's got some great playing. It's a very laid back album. It just sounds like the Pat Metheny group, but it's Pat Metheny. It's just him doing everything, and it's just really good. So we got theme from Passaggio per Paradiso, Martyr's theme, The Roads of Marsh, Martyr's house story, The menacing wolf story, Martyr's stag story, Learning on the road, Private Eye, Martyr on the bus, Martyr in the fields, Remembering home, Meeting the kids, Renato's theme, which just sounds like Lyle Mays. It's amazing. Pat Metheny playing piano. He just sounds like Lyle Mays. It's like his twin. And then we got the big epic finale. It's always worth the trouble. And then we got Don't Forget Renato's theme, which just sounds like Pat Metheny and Lyle Mays playing together, but it's all Pat overdubbed. It's a really, really good soundtrack from start to finish. And Yeah, this is really good. It's a really lovely album. As I said, it's quite haunting, very new age-ish, but very enjoyable. I really reached for this one quite a lot. Big improvement from Zero Tolerance for Silence, in my opinion. But yeah, this is much better. Standout tracks for me are Theme from Passaggio per Paradiso, The Roads of Marsh, Wolf Story, Learning on the Road, Private Eye, Renato's theme, Finale, It's Always Worth the Trouble, and don't forget Renato's theme. Great stuff here. All compositions written and composed by Pat Metheny, one of Pat Metheny's best film scores. I love it. It's a fantastic album slash film score. Not an easy one to find, but if you can find it, buy it. It's really good. Some great playing from Pat Metheny, and he knows how to write a tune. That's all I've got to say. And Pat Metheny on piano is just nuts. Just sounds like Lyle Mays. Excellent stuff here. So there you have it. Passaggio per Paradiso. Lovely soundtrack and one of Pat Metheny's most enjoyable film scores. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1999, and this is also a film score, and it's an amazing soundtrack, and some of these tracks would remain in Pat Metheny's setlist for quite a while, and it's a lovely album, and it's a little bit different to Passaggio per Paradiso, but still highly enjoyable. And this one is A Map of the World. So this is a much more heavily orchestrated album, and it's got Pat Metheny on acoustic guitars, piano and keyboards, Steve Rodby on bass, Dave Samuels on percussion, and Gil Goldstein on keyboards as well. And he also done quite a lot of the orchestration, and he conducts a lot of the proceedings. And Steve Rodby did quite a lot of the arrangements as well. So there's 28 tracks. They're all quite fairly short tracks. A couple of them are a little bit long, but it's pretty much a long album. But most of the tracks are, quite short. But it's a really good album, and it's very laid back, very feel good in some parts. A little bit of menace in there, but it's just a really good album. And a lot of people don't really know about this one, same as Passaggio per Paradiso, but still highly enjoyable nonetheless. So we got the title track, A Map of the World, absolutely beautiful. We got Family, another great track. North, Home, Sisters, Childhood. Fall from Grace is lovely. Memory, Gone, Flight, which sees Steve Rodby getting a bit down and dirty on the bass. Alone, Outcasts, Sunday, Discovery, Acceptance, Realization. Siloki, Night, Sunrise, Resolution, Pictures, Patience, Transition, Reunion, Renewal, Homecoming, which is just absolutely lovely. Very feel good, summery, Land of the Heart. Got a very Kansas feel to it, which is no surprise because Pat Metheny is from Kansas City. It's just very cornfield, it's just like family meeting each other for the first time in a long time. Just really lovely, very feel good track, forgiving and holding us, but a very good, strong soundtrack from start to finish. Very lovely, very lush, very laid back, and no wild moments here. It's just Pat Metheny on acoustic guitar with a full orchestra. It's just absolutely beautiful. I really enjoy this one a lot. It's a long album, but as I said earlier, a lot of the tracks are quite short, so it just flies by. You don't really realize how long this album really is. So, standout tracks for me are A Map of the World, Family, North, Reunion, Homecoming, and Outcasts and Childhood and Sisters. But the whole soundtrack is just really good. Really enjoy this one a lot. Highly recommend you check this one out. If you like to hear Pat Metheny in a more cinematic environment on acoustic guitar, I think this is the one to definitely check out. It's really, really good. I really enjoy this one a lot. And it's one I listen to quite regularly. It's one of those albums, it's perfect for driving or you're on a long flight. This is definitely the one to listen to if you're experiencing any of those things. It's just a nice travel album, in my opinion. So there you have it. Pat Metheny, A Map of the World. Excellent stuff and a lovely album. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2000, and this sees Pat Metheny return to the trio format once again, with a rhythm section featuring two young, like-minded players who have played with just about everyone you can imagine, and this one is called Trio 99 2000. So, unlike Pat Metheny's previous trio recordings that featured an iconic rhythm section, this time round we see Pat Metheny hooking up with two young musicians, bassist Larry Grenadier and drummer Bill Stewart. Now, Pat Metheny is no stranger to Bill Stewart. They collaborated together with John Scofield and Steve Swallow on the iconic I Can See Your House From Here. And Larry Grenadier, who has been a long-time collaborator and bassist for pianist Brad Mehldau's trio. So all these guys are no strangers to one another, and an amazing trio, lots of energy, very fast-paced, and it's just really good. So Pat Metheny on electric and acoustic guitars, Larry Grenadier on bass, and Bill Stewart on drums. It's a very different trio album. No synclavier, none of that wild stuff, just an unplugged situation with Pat Metheny doing what he does best, and that's just play and deliver excellent music. And it's kind of a mix-up of originals and some standards, but highly enjoyable and one that I love listening to quite a lot. I've just listened to this again just recently, and I forgot how good this trio album really was. So we got the hard-hitting Go Get It, John Coltrane's Giant Steps, Just Like the Day, which features some excellent acoustic playing from Pat Metheny, just absolutely beautiful. We've got Soul Cowboy, another great track. The Sun in Montreal, another great song as well. Wayne Shorter's Capricorn is absolutely incredible. The Haunting We Had a Sister, which originally was a PMG track that Pat Metheny used to play live. He used to just go absolutely nuts on the acoustic guitar. And it originally was featured on Joshua Redman's Wish album. So this is the first time that Pat Metheny had officially recorded this composition for one of his albums, and it's just absolutely beautiful. I love this track. It's one of my favourite Pat Metheny acoustic tracks. What Do You Want? Another great track. A Lot of Living to Do, another great song. PMG's Lone Jack, which gets a trio workout, really good song. And we got Travels, which was originally appeared on a Pat Metheny Group live album of the same name. Gets an official studio workout with Pat Metheny strumming away on acoustic guitar. What a way to close out the album. You know, doesn't get any better than that. It's just a really nice way to close out a very classy and elegant trio album. Great stuff. So the standout tracks for me are Go Get It, The Sun in Montreal, Just Like the Day, We Had a Sister, and Travels. But the whole album is just excellent. No wild guitar synth here, I'm afraid. It's just Pat Metheny, unplugged, playing away with two great, talented young musicians. Doesn't get any better than that. It's just an excellent trio album. It's different, and sometimes different is good, but still highly enjoyable nonetheless. So there you have it. Pat Metheny, Trio 99 2000. Excellent album, and another great trio album by Pat Metheny. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2000 as well, and it's a double live album, and this features Pat Metheny still with the same trio comprised of bassist Larry Grenadier and drummer Bill Stewart, and this one is Trio Live. So this is the tour of Trio 99 2000, and it's a fantastic live album. One of the best Pat Metheny live albums, certainly up there with Travels. Really good. and it's kind of a mixture of different materials. So we got some question and answer material, we got some PMG material reworked as the trio, we've got some brand new compositions which have only ever appeared live. And this is not for the faint-hearted. This is not like Trio 99-2000, which was very laid back. This is hard-hitting, packs a punch, and it's really enjoyable. And this is pretty much like highlights of the tour that Pat Metheny did with this trio, and it's just excellent. It's really good, and it's a long album. It's a really long album, but highly enjoyable nonetheless. And it's a double album, 2 discs. So disc one, we've got Bright Side's Life. Can't get any better than that. What a great way to open this live set. And then we got the almost 20-minute version of Question and Answer, which Pat Metheny switches to guitar synth, and he just absolutely goes nuts. It's absolutely hard hitting, red hot, blazing. It's just wild. And yeah, I love Question and Answer, but I think I like the live version just maybe a little bit more. He just goes absolutely mad. And this version has pretty much remained in the set list to this day. And I saw Pat Metheny and Antonio Sanchez do this a few times over the years. It's just absolutely mental, really is. Then we got John Coltrane's Giant Steps. Then we got the haunting Into the Dream, which features Pat Metheny on 42-string Picasso. I like the live version better than the Imaginary Day cuts. Just something about it. It's just longer, a bit more drawn out, and very atmospheric. And this leads into PMG's So May It Secretly Begin, which really sounds good. Obviously, the original has a special place for me, but I do like the trio version. It's really good. Then we've got The Bat, which gets a trio workout. Nice laid back number. All the Things You Are, another great track as well. Then we get into disc 2. We got the iconic James, excellent track. Unity Village is another great track as well. We've got Soul Cowboy is a great track. Night Turns Into Day, which is a nice, gorgeous acoustic ballad. And then we got the dark, brooding, menacing, shredfest, hard-hitting Faith Healer, which sounds like if Off Ramp and Song X and The Calling fused together, this is what you'd get. Sounds like mad scientist mode for Pat Metheny up there in his big creepy castle, cooking up some chemical stew and just going absolutely mad. This is probably the most hard-hitting track I've ever heard Pat Metheny do, and the guitar playing on it is just menacing. It sounds like he's playing backwards at times. It's just absolutely menacing. And every time you think it stops, it starts again. It goes like it's just, oh my god, it's just absolutely mad. And then we got Counting Texas, which features Pat Metheny on fretless guitar. Got kind of like a hillbilly sort of sound to it, you know, really good. But yeah, this is a really good live album, really enjoyable. So standout tracks for me on disc 1 are Question and Answer, Into the Dream, So May It Secretly Begin, and The Bat. Standout tracks for me on disc 2, James, Night Turns Into Day, Faith Healer, and Counting Texas. It's a great live album. I love this one a lot, and it's really enjoyable. Some parts are not for the faint-hearted, but it's still really good nonetheless. I really like this one. It's a lot of fun. It's a great trio live album. So there you have it. It's Pat Metheny Trio live. Excellent stuff. One of the best Pat Metheny live albums in his catalogue. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2003, and this is a solo guitar album, and this one is One Quiet Night. So this features Pat Metheny on solo baritone guitar, and like I said at the beginning, for me, the best listening experience ever is Pat Metheny solo guitar. Doesn't get any better than that. And this is one of my favorite Pat Metheny solo guitar albums. I listen to this one quite a lot. It's really good, very lovely, no overdubs, it's just Pat Metheny on his guitar, and it's a beautiful album. It's a really really good album, very lush, very atmospheric, and some great playing as well. And a lot of the material here is mostly all Pat Metheny originals. We've got Don't Know Why by Harris, and we've got My Song by Keith Jarrett, and we've got a bonus track in here as well. But this is a really good album. It's quite a long album. Most of the material here is all originals, and we've got one reworking of a PMG classic. But yeah, this is a really good, lovely album, and one that I listen to all the time. I really go to this one a lot. Anytime I'm by myself, or if I just want to relax, this is the one I listen to a lot. It's just so good and very peaceful. And that's what I love about Pat Metheny. He can do wild, he can do hard hitting, he can do mellow, he can do it all. He really is a versatile guitar player. And, for me, Pat Metheny is at his most enjoyable is solo guitar. I love all the trio stuff, I love all the group stuff, I love everything he does, except one. You know the one I'm talking about. But this is really good. I think, Pat Metheny's solo guitar just takes you on a real journey, and this one is no exception. I think it's a really enjoyable album. So we got the title track, One Quiet Night. It's just a great, lovely way to open this album. Song for the Boys, very fast strumming, enjoyable. Don't know why Norah Jones sang this song, but Pat Metheny turns it into an instrumental masterpiece. Really good. Another Chance is another great song. Time Goes On is excellent. My Song, Pat Metheny does a great job covering Keith Jarrett's iconic track. Peace Memory is another great song. Ferry Across the Mersey, which is composed by Marsden, lovely version. Over on 4th Street is great. I Will Find the Way is another great song. North to South, East to West is a great song. Last Train Home, what more can you say, really? One of the greatest PMG songs ever. Gets a nice acoustic workout. And then we got the bonus track in All We See, which is a really good track. A little bit long, but it's a good track. Uh, North to South, East to West is quite long. It's like nearly 12 minutes, but it's a really good song. Standout tracks for me are One Quiet Night, Song for the Boys, Don't Know Why, My Song, I Will Find the Way, North to South, East to West, and Last Train Home, and All We See. Great album, one of my all-time favourite solo guitar Pat Metheny albums. Very enjoyable, and one that I reach for all the time. It's just absolutely gorgeous solo acoustic album. So there you have it. It's Pat Metheny, One Quiet Night. Excellent stuff. One of my all-time favourites. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2008. And this sees Pat Metheny return to the trio format once again, this time with an all-star rhythm section. And for me, this was the last Pat Metheny trio album that he put out, but it's really good, and I really enjoy this one a lot. It's a little bit different to the previous trio albums, but still highly enjoyable nonetheless. This one is Day Trip. So Day Trip features Pat Metheny on guitars, Christian McBride on bass, and longtime collaborator and drummer Antonio Sanchez from the Pat Metheny group. So the trio of Pat Metheny, Christian McBride, and Antonio Sanchez, they had been playing together for about 5 years or so, but they hadn't recorded an album. So finally, after lots of heavy touring all around the world, these three finally got round to releasing a studio album. And you know what? Doesn't disappoint. It's really good. It's a bit different to the previous trio albums. It's a mixture of everything. It's hard hitting, it's laid back, but it's still highly enjoyable. Now, all of the trio albums that Pat Metheny has put out, they're all different. So, Trio 99 2000 featured two young musicians in Larry Grenadier and Bill Stewart. Question and Answer had two legends in Dave Holland and Roy Haynes. Same with Rejoicing, two legends in Charlie Haden and Billy Higgins. And Bright Side's Life, which was also a trio album, featured a future legend in Jaco Pastorius and an established and respected veteran in Bob Moses. Now, with Christian McBride and Antonio Sanchez, they're what you would call two guys on the rise. McBride, of course, had been around a lot longer, so he was already an established bassist who had played with everyone. And Antonio Sanchez, he was really coming into his own as a drummer after playing with the Pat Metheny group for a number of years. And he's also been involved in a number of different projects with Pat Metheny. So Sanchez was really on the rise, and McBride was kind of like, the established guy. So this trio didn't really have an iconic rhythm section like some of the other albums, but still a great rhythm section nonetheless. And what Pat Metheny always did with his trios, he always put guys together who had never played together before. And with McBride and Sanchez, prior to this album, they hadn't played together before. So Pat Metheny putting these two together to see how it would work really paid off. And these guys would go on to do a lot of stuff with Pat Metheny. They also got to play with Metheny and Brecker, got to do a lot of different things. So it's cool. They're a great rhythm section. Christian McBride is a very muscular bass player, and Antonio Sanchez, one of my all-time favorite drummers. He's such a powerhouse, and he can do it all. So highly versatile. So all of the compositions are written and composed by Pat Metheny, mostly all new material, and the exception of a reworked PMG track and a reworked John Scofield track that he played with Scofield. But great album. Love this one a lot. It's one of my favorite trio albums. So we've got Son of 13, great fast-paced opener. At Last You're Here, another great laid-back track. Let's Move, lovely track. Snova is another great track. Calvin's Keys is another great track as well. Is This America, Katrina 2005, with a great bowed bass solo from Christian McBride and Metheny playing lovely acoustic guitar. When We Were Free, which originally appeared on Pat Metheny Group Quartet, gets a nice trio working, and it's just so hard hitting, and starts off with dirty bass playing from McBride and then hard hitting drumming from Sanchez, and then Pat Metheny going nuts on the guitar synth. Dreaming Trees is another gorgeous ballad. The Red One, which originally appeared on I Can See Your House From Here with John Scofield, red hot. And then we got the long title track, Day Trip. Absolutely lovely. And if you buy the Japanese edition of Day Trip, you get a bonus track called What's Not. That's also a great track as well. But Day Trip's just a fine trio album from start to finish, all Pat Metheny originals, and just really enjoyable. It's a really good, enjoyable album. So the standout tracks for me are Is This America, Son of 13, When We Were Free, The Red One, and Day Trip. But the whole album from top to bottom is just excellent. And again, it's not one I reach for often, but it's one that I do listen to when I do get around to it. I do like listening to it when I can. I might try and listen to it a little bit more, but it's really good. It's a lot better than I remembered. I think it kind of gets slept on a little bit at times, but I still think it's worth checking out. It's a really enjoyable trio album. So there you have it. Pat Metheny, Day Trip. Lovely trio album and a little bit underrated, I would say, but still very enjoyable nonetheless. Excellent stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this also came out in 2008. And this sees Pat Metheny still with the same trio featuring the rhythm section of bassist Christian McBride and drummer Antonio Sanchez. And this one is a live EP, and this one is called Tokyo Day Trip Live. So this is the same trio as I mentioned already, and it's not a live album of the album Day Trip with that material. This has got 5 brand new Pat Metheny compositions that weren't on this trio's studio effort, and it's very, very good. It's very enjoyable, hard hitting, dark, laid back, lush. It's all here. It's really good, and I like it. It's a really good album. I'm not sure what the plan was for this album. I get the impression this was probably a warm up for a full live album, but unfortunately, it never came out. I would have loved to have maybe see a double live album from this trio because this is some really good playing from all 3 musicians. And yeah, these guys really get to stretch it out and take their musicianship and playing to different places that they didn't take on Day Trip. But this is really good. So we got the first track, Tromazo, which features Pat Metheny on sitar. Then we got Traveling Fast, which is nice and fast paced, Pat Metheny style. In Ori, which is a lovely acoustic number. And then we got the hard hitting Back Arm and Black Charge, which is pretty much Pat Metheny trio in power trio mode. And it's just nuts. It's just hard hitting, packs a punch, and it's kind of similar to Faith Healer, but just much more aggressive. And the bass playing and the drumming from McBride and Sanchez is just absolutely incredible. And then we got the acoustic closer, The Night Becomes You. Really good album. Shame it's only an EP. Would have loved to have had a full live album from this trio, but what we got here is absolutely devastating and so good. And really enjoy this one a lot. I haven't listened to it in quite a while. I still remember what it sounds like, but I may go back and listen to this again at some point. But it's very, very good. So the standout tracks for me are Traveling Fast, Inori, and Back Arm and Black Charge. Now there's a live performance on YouTube which sees Pat Metheny playing with Tribal Tech bassist Gary Willis and saxophonist Libet Forcioni. So it's basically half of Slaughterhouse 3. Go and check it out. It will blow your mind. It's fantastic playing. But yeah, this is a really good album and highly recommended. But another great trio album from Pat Metheny. And this would be the last trio album that Pat Metheny would record. You know, we're coming up to what now? It's been like, what, 16 years already? Damn. I'm really ready for another trio album. But we'll see, really. But I'd love to see another one, maybe with a new rhythm section this time. Or maybe get these guys back. Who knows? But I'd love to see Pat Metheny do another trio album at some point in the near future, because that's another environment he's made a career out of, and he's made some legendary music in that format. Might be time to revisit it one more time with a new rhythm section, but we'll see. So there you have it, Tokyo Day Trip Live EP. Excellent stuff. Would have liked a full live album from this, but what we got here is tremendous. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2010, and this sees Pat Metheny give the term one-man band a whole new meaning, as we see Pat Metheny play all of the instruments himself, but not in the way that you would think. Pat Metheny utilizes cutting-edge technology through robotics, which he calls orchestronics, and this allows Pat Metheny to essentially play all of the instruments with his guitar in real time and just sounds like a one-man orchestra. And this album is, in my opinion, probably the most unusual and unique recording that Pat Metheny has ever put out. And it allows Pat Metheny to go in completely different directions that no other musician has ever embarked on before. And this one is simply called Orchestrion. So, as I said, this is Pat Metheny on guitar and orchestrionics. So, this allows Pat Metheny to play multiple instruments in real time all at once. So, we got Pat Metheny playing piano, marimba, vibraphone, orchestra bells, bass, guitar bots, percussion, cymbals, drums, bottles, and other mechanical instruments and keyboards as well. So it's a very unusual and unique project. And I was lucky to catch this tour, and it was probably the most craziest thing I've ever seen. You've just got this massive cabinet of multiple instruments, and Pat Metheny is playing all of the instruments on his guitar by himself. So this really takes solo guitar performance to a new level. And I remember a guy sitting next to me and my dad, and I remember him saying to us, oh, I'm fully expecting to see Antonio Sanchez behind the drum kit, but there was no musician there. And this really shows you how mad Pat Metheny really is. I think even Pat Metheny said himself that I'm essentially a mad scientist. And I wouldn't say he's a mad scientist, but he's quite eccentric to come up with a concept like this. But it's unusual. I wouldn't say it's laughable, far from it. It's just different. I don't think I've ever seen anyone do this, but if anyone can pull off such a unique concept like this, it's Pat Metheny, and he does it really well. So we got 5 tracks here. We got the title track, Orchestrion, Entry Points, Expansion, Soul Search, and Spirit of the Air. When I first heard this album, which was the title track, I'm not going to pan it. It's a great album, but I felt the title track sounded like a PMG demo tape. There wasn't really much grit to it. There wasn't much life to it. It sounds like a demo he would present to the guys and say, right, this is what we're going to play for the next album. Let me know what you think. We're all going to try and play it. Just sounds like a demo track. It's some great playing. Don't get me wrong. But it just sounded like a PMG demo track. Now, the rest of the album is remarkably strong. But I think when I've listened to this again, if you shut your eyes and just kind of like ignore the fact that this is the orchestrion, it's a really strong album and it holds up very well. And it's one of those things that you really got to listen to it to understand what the hell is really going on. I still don't know what the hell is going on, but musically, there's some great stuff here. Is it a laid back album? I wouldn't say laid back. It's not hard hitting. It's just different. It's just not something you would expect to hear from a musician. But as I said, if anyone can pull this off, it's Pat Metheny. Entry Point is quite a dark, ominous track, but still good. Expansion's a really good track. Soul Search has got a really lovely piano intro, which could have easily have been Lyle Mays, really. Very good track as well. Spirits of the Air has got some great bass work as well. And as I said, some parts it does sound like PMG demo numbers, but it's still a highly enjoyable album nonetheless. So the standout tracks for me are Expansion, Soul Search, and Orchestrion. Now, originally I didn't really care much for the title track, but I've grown to like it as I've listened to it more and more. But very enjoyable, and it's one of the most unique things I have ever seen live, and it was a great show. It really was, until the orchestrion packed up. No fault of Pat's though, that was more the venue, but it's still a great show nonetheless. And the orchestrion packed up, and Pat Metheny just switched to solo guitar, so that was even better. So when all else fails, when the orchestrion goes down, go solo guitar. That's the way to do it. Very enjoyable album, but as I said, it's not bad, it's just different and unusual. So there you have it. Pat Metheny, Orchestrion. Great album, different, and unique, to say the very least, but still highly enjoyable nonetheless. Great stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2011. And this sees Pat Metheny return to solo guitar once again. And it's a little bit of a different solo guitar album to the ones we've heard from Pat Metheny in the past. And this one is called What's It All About? So this album features Pat Metheny on solo baritone guitar once again, and he's also playing 6-string guitar, 42-string percussive guitar, and nylon string guitar. So unlike previous Pat Metheny solo guitar albums where it features mostly Pat Metheny originals, maybe a standard or two here, this album here features mostly cover versions. And Pat Metheny is one of those special musicians. He can take any song, make it his own, and make it sound good. And he does this here once again. So a lot of the songs we got on here are Beatles songs, Paul Simon, The Carpenters, Antonio Carlos Jobim, and Carly Simon and Jacob Brackman. You know, there's all sorts of different songs from different people. You know, we got one song by Hal David and Burt Bacharach. You know, there's all sorts of different songs here by very famous people. But it's a really lovely album. And as I said, Pat Metheny's at his best solo guitar, but he's at his best in every situation. But I think solo guitar for me is where it's at. So we got The Sound of Silence, Cherish, Alfie, Pipeline, Garota de Ipanema, Rainy Days and Mondays, That's the Way I've Always Heard It Should Be, Slow Hot Wind, Betcha by Golly Wow, and I Love Her, which I've seen Pat Metheny play quite a number of times. But really lovely album, and Pat Metheny on baritone guitar is just absolutely beautiful. And as I said, Pat Metheny could do 100 of these albums and they could all sound great because that's just how good he is. Standout tracks for me are The Sound of Silence, Alfie, Rainy Days and Mondays, Betcha by Golly Wow, and I Love Her. Lovely album. Kind of look at this as like a sequel to One Quiet Night, but just different. And it's, as I said, there's no Pat Metheny originals. It's just all covers, and it works. It just really works. And I really respect Pat Metheny going in a different direction and trying out something completely different. And he makes it work. And he makes everything work. And that's just a true testament to the musician that Pat Metheny really is. So there you have it. What's It All About? An excellent solo guitar album and another favourite of mine from the man himself. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2013. And this sees Pat Metheny cross paths with another musician who is an important figure in the avant-garde genre. And this album is a true meeting of two completely different musicians who come together to produce a very unique album. And although this musician that Pat Metheny hooks up with isn't actually featured on this album, he doesn't play on it, his presence and influence is felt all throughout the album. And this features all of his compositions. And the gentleman I'm talking about is one of the most important men in the history of music. And this next one is Tap, John Zorn's Book of Angels, Volume 20. So this album, although it's a Pat Metheny album, features John Zorn's compositions from his Masada book. And this album, although it doesn't feature John Zorn on this one, he doesn't actually play with Pat Metheny. You can very much hear his direction and vision throughout the music. You can really hear his influence. And this is essentially a duo album, although it's not credited as a duo album by name. It's very much a duo project. So we got Pat Metheny on acoustic and electric guitars, baritone guitar, sitar, tiplers, bass, piano, keyboards, orchestronic, marimba, orchestra bells, bandoneon, percussion, electronics, and flugelhorn. And we got longtime collaborator Antonio Sanchez on drums. So this is very much two musicians, Pat Metheny playing everything and Sanchez bringing the power with his drumming. Pat Metheny is one of those special musicians. He can take anyone's music, make it his own, and make it work. And this was a collaboration that took a lot of people by surprise. You know, some people said, why would the same guy who made Bright Size Life and all these other lovely recordings, why would he hook up with someone like John Zorn? Ornette Coleman, anyone? Yeah, that's what I thought too. But, you know, it was inevitable that Pat Metheny and John Zorn would team up to do something, and it works. It's a partnership that works really, really well. Would have been interesting to hear what John Zorn and Pat Metheny would have sounded like playing together and how they would have matched up, but this collaboration works very well. I really think they brought out the best in one another, and this album was very successful. There are about two tracks that kind of a hit and miss for me, but the rest of the track in the middle, about the four tracks, excellent. It's really, really good. So we got the first track, Mastima, which is weird, out there, crazy. It's a good opener. Not really a track I like much, but I've grown to like it over the years. It's not that bad. Albion, absolutely beautiful. This could have easily been a trio track. It just sounds like a trio album with Sanchez. Pat Metheny's playing everything. You know, you can hear the bass, just all Pat. It's really good. Far Sis, which is another hard hitting, fast paced track of chaos. And I remember I read a comment somewhere. It says it sounds like a car chase scene in Jerusalem on a Mission Impossible movie. I can see what they mean by that. And Pat Metheny goes absolutely nuts on guitar synth. It's really good. And then we got Sariel, which has got Pat Metheny playing fretless guitar. He's got like this Jewish Indonesian sort of influence in his playing. Dun, 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 just absolutely beautiful, and Metheny and Sanchez just go absolutely mad at the end. Really good. And then you got Fa Nul, which is just probably the darkest and most brooding track. It's got a very long, drawn out coda. It just goes on and on and on. It sounds like a baby screaming. It's you can hear people speaking, and he's like, no, it's just really menacing, and then it just morphs into a great Pat Metheny acoustic solo guitar piece with Sanchez playing in the background. Really good track. And then we got Hermes, which is essentially wild piano playing and drumming, and it's just avant-garde madness, but still quite fun to listen to nonetheless. So the standout tracks for me are Albion, probably my favourite track of the entire album. Farsis is another great track, and Saril and Fanu, they're my favourite tracks. But the other two tracks, the beginning and the end, I don't care for them that much, but they're still quite decent tracks. But the tracks in the middle, excellent stuff. Cut the intro and the ending track out of this album. You've got a very good Pat Metheny album here, but still really good nonetheless. And I do listen to Tap quite often. It's a really good album as well. So who knows? Maybe we might see Metheny and Zorn do another one, because I know they did record quite a lot of songs, and these were the ones that they chose. But I like it. It's a really good album and quite enjoyable as well. Got to have an acquired taste for this. I've got to have a certain ear for it, but I like it. It's really good. So there you have it, Pat Metheny Tap, John Zorn's Book of Angels, Volume 20. Excellent album. So we move on to the next album, and this one also came out in 2013. And this one is a soundtrack of a Pat Metheny DVD, and it's more or less an extension of a project that Pat Metheny started up in 2010, and it's pretty much more or less a continuation of what he was trying to do back then. And this one is called The Orchestrion Project. So Pat Metheny put out a DVD called The Orchestrion Project, and this is more or less the soundtrack from that DVD. The track listing is completely different, but this is pretty much the soundtrack from that DVD, but really good. So this is essentially the Orchestrion studio album, but with bonus tracks. So it's pretty much got the entire Orchestrion suite, as he calls it, and the rest is all like PMG reworked and some other stuff from Pat Metheny's solo albums. So it's Pat Metheny on guitar and orchestronics, piano, marimba, vibraphone, orchestra bells, bass, guitar box, percussion, cymbals and drums, blown bottles and other custom fabricated acoustic mechanical instruments and robotic angelic guitar. This sounds actually a lot better than the Orchestrion studio album. I think it's got a much more clearer, crisper sound. The production is much more clearer, much more better in the mix. I'm not saying that Orchestrion sounded bad. It was good production, but I think the Orchestrion project sounds better. And I think the Orchestrion tracks from that album just sound much more spread out and a lot more thicker. Whereas the Orchestrion album, it just sounded a little bit thin in some parts. But here, there's plenty of meats here on these tracks. And I think I prefer these versions more than the studio album. So this is a double album. So on disc 1, we've got Improvisation 1, Antonia, Entry Point, Expansion, Improvisation 2, which is kind of like a precursor or a version of the Unity Band's Signals Orchestrion sketch. Sounds very similar to that. It's got a great guitar synth solo. Then we got 8081 slash Broadway Blues, which is just Pat Metheny going absolutely mad on the Orchestrion. Then we got the title track, Orchestrion. And then on disc 2, we got Soul Search, Spirits of the Air, Stranger in Town, which is a Pat Metheny group track from We Live Here, Sooner Con Mexico, Tell Her You Saw Me, and Unity Village. But very good, strong album. Probably a lot more stronger than the Orchestrion studio album, and very enjoyable as well. You know, the playing's very clear. You can hear a lot more going on, and it's great. I think it's a lot more thick as well, so it's a lot more solid, and it doesn't sound so thin and flat in certain spots. This is just a good, strong live album, essentially, with no audience, but really good. So standout tracks for me on disc 1 is Improvisation 2, Orchestrion, Entry Points, and Expansion. And standout tracks for me on disc 2 is Soul Search, Stranger in Town, Sunacon Mexico, and Tell Her You Saw Me. But really good album, and I think the Orchestrion material is showcased a lot better here than on the studio album. And as I said, the production here just sounds a lot more clearer and a lot more crisp, and a great listening experience nonetheless. So there you have it, the Orchestrion Project. Excellent stuff and very enjoyable. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2020. And this sees Pat Metheny returning to having a working band once again after the Unity Band. And this one is called From This Place. So, From This Place features Pat Metheny with his working quartet comprised of pianist William Simcock, bassist Linda Mahan O, and longtime drummer Antonio Sanchez. And we also got a few special guest appearances from percussionist Louis Conti, Michelle Necicello on vocals, and Gregor Moret on harmonica, who was a member of the Pat Metheny group. And we got the Hollywood Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Joe McNeely. And this is a really good, strong album. This was Pat Metheny's first album after many years since 2014's Kin with the Unity Group. And to come back with a brand new album, stronger than ever, is unbelievable. So, for Pat Metheny to go this long without making a new album and then to come back bigger and more epic than ever, it's just incredible. Hadn't lost a single step and sounds better than ever. And this really sounds like an extension of PMG in their prime, but combined with the cinematic scope of what Secret Story was. But it's really good. It's really enjoyable and one of my favorite albums, which I listen to quite a lot. And all of the compositions are written and composed by Pat Metheny. It's just an amazing album and really feels like a big cinematic movie. And that's what I like about Pat Metheny's music. It's so cinematic. Any of them could easily fit in with a movie. It's just so good. So we got the 13-minute epic America Undefined, which is just absolutely amazing. What a way to kick off a Pat Metheny album. If you're going to do it in epic style. And boy, do we really get off to an epic start. Great bass work from Linda O. Great piano play from Simcock, and Sanchez, he sounds great as always on drums, and Pat Metheny, enough said really. Wide and Far is a great track, which sounds like PMG in their prime. Great bass work by Linda at the end. Great piano playing again from William Simcock and the orchestra. I would have preferred to actually hear keyboards instead of an orchestra. That's what I liked about Pat Metheny Group just a little bit more. Lyle Mays did all of the keyboard orchestrations himself, but I see what Pat was trying to do, but it still works. But I just would have preferred maybe if some of that orchestration part could have been covered by a keyboard player, but it still works nonetheless. The spine-tingling You Are, absolutely amazing track. Same River, which has got an epic Pat Metheny guitar synth solo. And I love the bass intro at the beginning by Linda Mahan O, who just sounds incredible on this album. She's got a massive role on this album. Lots of bass work from her. Pathmaker is another great track as well. The Past in Us, which sounds like could have come from Secret Story. Great harmonica playing from Gregor Moret. Everything Explained, which has got a great piano drum duel between Sanchez and Simcock. Really good as well. Then we got the title track From This Place, which is, I think, from my understanding, the first vocal track that Pat Metheny has recorded since David Bowie, like in terms of like with actual words. I've got nothing against Michelle Necicello. She's an okay singer, but when she stops singing and then we get into the meat and potatoes, which is Pat Metheny on an acoustic guitar, it's just absolutely gorgeous. 66 is a great track which sounds like PMG's Last Train Home. It's got two great bass solos from Linda Mahan O. And then we got Love May Take a While, which is the bonus track, which sounds like a 50s movie. Absolutely beautiful. The whole album from start to finish is remarkably strong, and I would have preferred if I heard a quartet album just with these guys, but what we did get here, excellent stuff. Standout tracks for me are America Undefined, Wide and Far, You Are, Same River, The Past in Us, and 66. But very strong album, very enjoyable, and got to see the quartets live back in 2017. This album wasn't out then, I didn't play any of this material, but it's still a great show nonetheless. I think the standout musician on this entire album, barring Pat Metheny, is Linda Mahan O. She's just got a massive presence on the bass, and she's just all over this album with lots of great bass solos and great bass work. William Simcock, he doesn't try to be Lyle Mays. He's very much his own man. Great piano playing from him. And Antonio Sanchez, he just brings so much muscle and power to the music, as he has done with Pat Metheny for well over 2+ decades now. Fantastic drummer who just continues to keep getting better and better. So there you have it, From This Place. Excellent album. Pat Metheny returning with a vengeance, better than ever. Love it. Really enjoy this one a lot. One of my favourites. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2021. And this sees Pat Metheny venture into a completely different world, which is the world of classical music. And although Pat Metheny has dabbled in orchestrated music in the past, this is the first time that Pat Metheny has ever written and composed a series of compositions for another group of musicians. And Pat Metheny doesn't actually appear on this one, other than one track, which is the bonus track. But this once again shows that Pat Metheny is such a strong composer that he doesn't actually have to appear on this album. And it's a true testament to the musician that he really is. And you get to see another different side to Pat Metheny, and more importantly, his composing side. And this one is called Road to the Sun. This is the first Pat Metheny album in history that doesn't actually feature Pat Metheny, as I said, with the exception of one track. So we've got two pieces of music divided up into multiple parts. So we got Four Paths of Light, which is made up of 4 parts, and the title track, Road to the Sun, which is made up of 6 tracks. So Four Paths of Light is performed by Jason Viaux, who made a great classical solo guitar album playing all of Pat Metheny's famous compositions. And Road to the Sun is performed by the Los Angeles Guitar Quartet. So it's a very different kind of album, but very enjoyable nonetheless. It's not a jazz album, far from it. This is more leaning towards classical music. And the bonus track, which features Pat Metheny on 42-string percusso guitar, is called Fur Alina Arvo Part. Absolutely gorgeous. One of the best 42-string tracks I've ever heard from Metheny. It's very slow, very haunting, and very abstract in some parts. It's just absolutely incredible. So the standout tracks for me is Four Paths of Light, Road to the Sun, part 3 and 4 and 5, and of course the bonus track for Elena Arvo parts. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And as I said, this is Pat Metheny showing his more classical side, and you know what? He doesn't disappoint. You know, as I said, Pat Metheny not afraid of trying new things and venturing into different areas. And once again, he just proves that he's the man and he can write a good composition, even for the classical world. And this is a lovely album. Highly recommended for classical fans. Excellent stuff. Road to the Sun. Absolutely gorgeous. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one also came out in 2021. And this is a live album, which sees Pat Metheny returning to the trio format once again, but this time with an added twist. For the first time ever, Pat Metheny is leading a trio that doesn't actually feature a bass player. This sees Pat Metheny playing in an organ trio, which is something he has never done in his entire career until now. And this one is called Side-Eye, New York City, V124. Excellent live album. And as I said, this is Pat Metheny playing in an organ trio setting, which is something he has never ever done in his entire career. So we're getting to see a brand new side to Pat Metheny playing in a new environment that he's never ventured into before. And you know what? He doesn't disappoint. Pat Metheny always excels in every environment he plays in, and he does it once again here. So this sees Pat Metheny playing with new, young, and up and coming musicians, and he pretty much does what Gary Burton did for him years earlier: take him in his wing and more or less mold them and showcase their talents. So Pat Metheny is essentially playing the elder statesman and just recruiting a bunch of talented young guys and giving them the opportunity to do their thing, and also getting to learn from the man himself. So everyone's a winner. So the musicians featured on here, we've got Marcus Gilmore on drums, who is the grandson of legendary drummer Roy Haynes, who, as we all know, has played and collaborated with Pat Metheny. And we've also got the amazing James Francis on piano, keyboards, and organ. And Pat Metheny, of course, on guitars and orchestronics. Excellent live album, highly enjoyable. We've got 3 brand new compositions, and we've got a reworking of a composition that appeared on Michael Brecker's Time Is of the Essence. And we've got a bunch of old Pat Metheny favourites just reworked for this band. And the way Pat Metheny makes this trio sound like 5 or 6 guys is just amazing. It's such a testament to what Pat Metheny can do. He can take a small group and just make it sound massive, and he does this here. So we got It Starts When We Disappear, which is like 13 minutes long, which is more like an electronic showcase. Absolutely gorgeous. We got PMG classic Better Days Ahead, Timeline, which appeared on Michael Brecker's Time Is of the Essence, Bright Side's Life, Lodger, which sounds like Jimi Hendrix playing Travels, absolutely red hot, Syrup Horn, Turnaround, and Zenith Blue, which is just PMG madness, if you will. It sounds like PMG. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And the opening kind of sounds similar to the Unity groups on Day One. And then Pat Metheny just goes absolutely nuts on the guitar synth. It's just absolutely incredible. Standout tracks for me are It Starts When We Disappear, Timeline, Lodger, and Zenith Blue. Excellent album. And if you pick up the Japanese edition of this one, you get a bonus track as well, which is The Bat. Excellent album. And I got to see Pat Metheny's Side Eye, although with 2 different musicians, which was Chris Fishman and Joe Dyson, which is an excellent show. And as I said, it's a trio, but it sounds like it's 5 or 6 guys. Just absolutely incredible. Love this band, and hopefully we'll see Side Eye do some more soon. Maybe we'll get a studio album with new material. Fingers crossed. So there you have it. Pat Metheny Side Eye, New York City, V1 to 4. Excellent stuff. Great live album. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2023. And this sees Pat Metheny return to solo guitar once again, but with an added twist this time: solo electric guitar. And this one is called Dreambox. So Dreambox sees Pat Metheny doing solo electric guitar. There's a little bit of baritone guitar, which is overdubbed, but this is all predominantly solo electric guitar. And you know what? Solo guitar doesn't get any better. Pat Metheny doing what he does best, and that's just making lovely music. And to hear Pat Metheny play solo electric guitar is different, because we've heard Pat Metheny do solo acoustic lots of times before, but never really electric, like at least to this extent. And you know what? Doesn't disappoint. It's absolutely amazing. So tracks we got here are Waves Are Not the Ocean, From the Mountains, Ollie and Guard, Trust Your Angels, Never Was Love, I Fall in Love Too Easily, PC of Belgium, Morning of the Carnival, and Clouds Can't Change the Sky. So it's mostly Metheny originals, and there's a couple of standards as well. But excellent album, great guitar playing, as you'd expect from Pat Metheny. It's just a very lovely album, very lush, very atmospheric, very peaceful, and very laid back. Absolutely love this album. Standout tracks for me are The Waves Are Not the Ocean, From the Mountains, Trust Your Angels, Clouds Can't Change the Sky, and Ollie and Guard. Great album, really enjoyable, and really mellow album as well. You know, it's one of those albums you can just listen to with the lights dimmed and just relax. It's just a very relaxing album, and that's what Pat Metheny can do. He can really help you relax with his playing and his music. It's just so good, so atmospheric, and very ambient as well. So there you have it. Pat Metheny, Dreambox, an excellent solo guitar album of solo electric. Highly recommended for all guitar fans. Brilliant album. So we move on to the next album, which sees Pat Metheny continue in the solo guitar environment. And this is the newest album that's just recently come out. And this one came out in 2024. And this one is called Moondial. So pretty much a continuation of Dreambox. This time we see Pat Metheny completely venturing into baritone guitar with brand new strings, and it's just absolutely a lovely album. Really is, and very enjoyable as well. And this has got a mixture of new compositions and reworks of some of his more well-known material, and there's some standards as well. So we got Moondial, the title track, La Crosse, You're Everything by Chick Corea, Here, There, and Everywhere by the Beatles, We Can't See It, But It's There, Falcon Love, which is essentially a reworking of The Falcon from The Falcon and the Snowman soundtrack, Everything Happens to Me slash Somewhere, Londonderry Air, This Belongs to You, which originally appeared on the Unity Band album, so it gets a nice acoustic workout here, Shoga, My Love and I, Angel Eyes, and Moondial Epilogue. Great collection of songs from start to finish, some excellent playing, and some beautiful music here, courtesy of the one and only Pat Metheny himself. And the standout tracks for me are Moondial, La Crosse, You're Everything, Falcon Love, This Belongs to You, and Moondial Epilogue. But the whole album is just absolutely beautiful, and it's definitely a nice follow up to Dreambox. And I'm really digging Pat Metheny going down the solo guitar path. I'm really enjoying it a lot. Don't get me wrong, I do miss him playing in a band, but right now I'm really loving Pat Metheny playing solo guitar. I think it's just absolutely an amazing listening experience. And I'm looking forward to seeing him live playing solo guitar, which is coming up for me very, very soon. So should be an amazing show, and can't wait to see him. Been seeing Pat Metheny live now for what, 21 years almost. So really looking forward to this show. So there you have it. Pat Metheny, Moondial, excellent solo guitar album. Tremendous stuff. Love it. So, which one out of all 24 Pat Metheny albums do I think is the best one? They're all good. Some of them are legendary, some of them are excellent, some of them are classics, some are a bit unusual, and any one of these albums could easily be a number one or two. You know, they're so good. You know, it's really, really hard to choose which one I think is the best one. But if I had to choose one which I think is the best one out of all of them, I'm definitely going with Secret Story. I think Secret Story is the one that's a culmination of all of Pat Metheny's hard work coming to the front. Musically, production wise, compositionally, everything about this album has it all going for him. And I think Pat Metheny really hit his creative peak with this one. I think he just really took things to a whole new level, and the orchestrations, the arrangements, the compositions, it's all there. The playing, he's just really on top form, and I don't think Pat Metheny has ever topped this album. All of them are great. All of his albums are excellent, but For me, Secret Story is right there at the top as his best work ever. And the fact that he still plays a lot of these songs to this day says a lot right there. And I don't think he's ever bettered this album, in my opinion. Secret Story, out of everything he's ever done, is for me the greatest Pat Metheny album of all time. I love all the trio stuff, they're all fantastic, and everything here, the solo guitar stuff is excellent, but for me, this is the one that really stands high above everything. So there you have it. Pat Metheny, Secret Story. For me, the best Pat Metheny album ever. Does not get any better than this. Absolutely love it. A true Pat Metheny masterpiece, in my opinion. Excellent stuff. So that's going to be it from me. I'm going to wrap this up now. What's your favourite Pat Metheny album from his solo catalogue? Is it Bright Size Life, Watercolors, New Chautauqua, 8081, Rejoicing, Question and Answer, Zero Tolerance for Silence, Secret Story, Map of the World, Passaggio per Paradiso, One Quiet Night, Orchestrion, The Orchestrion Project, Day Trip, Tokyo Day Trip Live, Trio 99 2000, Trio Live, What's It All About, From This Place, Dreambox, Moondial, Road to the Sun, or Side Eye, New York City V124. There's no right or wrong answer. We all have our favourite albums. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. So until then, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.